Hello everyone and welcome to the video, and today we're going to be talking about the best holy build in all of Elden Ring. So this is an amazing faith build. But quickly, before we get into this video, if you guys have any trouble getting any of the items because you don't want to go in New Game Plus and you missed them in your normal game, you can go to MMOEXP.com and pick up some of these items for very cheap, as well as any runes that you may want. And you can use code ISER for a 5% discount. I'll put the link in the description. So the first thing we always talk about with our builds is the gear of the build. So in our main hand and the main damage dealing part of the build is the Sacred Relic Sword. So this is going to be the main damage of the build, like I said, but it's mostly the L2 damage because it produces a very large AoE attack that projects very far in front of you, and you are able to do so much damage, as you guys were able to see in the beginning of the video. And next up in our offhand, we have the Golden Order Seal. This is going to boost our Fundamentalist Incantations. And since this is a holy build, this is a very important part of the build because a lot of our spells are holy based, and this Fundamentalist boost does a lot more damage. And for the fashion, we have no helmet on, and then we have the Tree Sentinel armor, gauntlets, and greaves. And for the first talisman, we have the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman. I run this on all my builds because it gives you an amazing boost to physical damage negation, and I love having it to be a little bit more tanky. And for the next talisman, we have the Sacred Scorpion Charm, which raises holy attack. This is very important for the build, obviously, because it is a holy build, and all of the attacks are centered around holy damage, so this gives a nice little boost. And then we have the Shard of Alexander. This greatly boosts the attack power of skills. Like I said, the main damage of this build comes from your main hand, L2 attack, which is a skill, and this boosts the damage of that. And last but not least, we have Flock's Canvas Talisman. This greatly increases the potency of incantations, which works very well for the build as well. And next up, we have our Flask of Wondrous Physic. So for this one, I have the Holy Shrouding Cracked Tear, which temporarily boosts holy attacks. This boosts it by a lot as well, so it gives you a lot of extra damage. And then we have the Opaline Bubble Tear, which significantly negates the damage received from the next attack. This works very well to make the build a little bit more tanky. And now the next thing we're going to talk about is the actual incantations that I use for this build. So I use Golden Vow. This increases your damage and damage reduction by 15%. And then I use Wrath of Gold, and this is essentially the same incantation as Wrath of the Gods in all of the other Dark Souls. Then I use Radagon's Rings, and I alternate a couple other incantations in and out, but essentially these are the three ones that you're going to want to make sure you use because they do a ton of damage. So obviously Wrath of the Gold is if anyone gets close, you could hit it, and it does tons of damage, as you'll see later on. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the downsides of the build, and some of them are the fact that it's mostly an AoE based build, so sometimes it can struggle with bosses. It still does a ton of damage, but it's best suited for taking out large groups of enemies and tons of enemies at once, because all of the abilities in the entire kit, including incantations, weapon art, everything, it's all large AoEs. Whereas it does do upwards of 3,000 damage per swing with the skill. I don't think that that's a crazy amount when you take into consideration the amount that other builds can do in single hits. But overall, it does give out really good damage. I would definitely say that the main downside of the build would be its single target damage. It doesn't have a whole lot. However, that is pretty much the only downside. The only other one I would say would be the long cast times of incantations. Incantations, especially Radagon's Rings, can take a long time to cast, especially when you charge it up. But overall, the range and amount of damage that you get from this build definitely makes up for the long cast time, because if you do it far enough away, people will try to close the distance generally in PvP, and they'll end up not getting close enough and getting killed because you have so much range. And if they don't try to close the distance, a lot of times they'll try to run away from your spells, but the L2 attack for your weapon covers so much ground that they'll actually get killed trying to run away sometimes. I'm going to attach a couple PvP clips, and that's another thing I want to talk about with this build, is the fact that it's actually pretty sturdy for PvP. I am currently level 150 with this build, so I am facing people with lots of health and completed builds, and I was able to one-shot them a couple times. So now I want to talk a little bit about my stats. Currently I actually don't have a saved picture of my stats, but essentially I was level 150. I had around 40 to 50 vigor. I had about 30 endurance, 25 mind, and then the rest of my points were put into strength. I believe, the exact requirement to use the Sacred Blade, I believe it was like 16 or 14 strength you needed for the blade, and I just had that. And then for the rest of my stats, I had them evenly distributed between faith and intelligence. I think I actually had more in faith. I think I was around 40 faith and 31 intelligence to be able to use the Radagon's Rings. So this is pretty much a almost like a hybrid build between faith and intelligence, but it does tons of damage, and the holy damage on this build is absolutely incredible. So one thing I didn't talk about really, and I just want to touch on, is the fact that if you guys want to see certain builds in the future, just comment them below, and whatever build gets liked the most on the top liked comment, I will make that build in the future. So if you guys have anything you want to see and it gets liked a lot, I will make that build. But I think that's pretty much it for today's video, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.